Welcome to the Idea Land podcast, hosted by Ravi Reddy. Spencer Hutchins is the CEO and co-founder of Concert Health, an all-round nice guy. Spencer talks to Ravi about his journey from the John Kerry presidential campaign, the first medical team at the FCC, to creating a digital health startup focused on improving our mental health.
Spencer Hutchins, welcome to Idea Land.
Great to be here. Great to see you.
Let me just get into it really quickly with you because we've known each other for a long time. How does it feel to be super successful?
I don't think I feel super successful in the business yet, although it's getting more and more exciting. I think on a day-to-day basis, I mostly think about, getting the kids on Zoom school or to their preschool, or figuring out how to balance a crazy life with a wife who's also working her butt off in a legal career and doing great, and sort of how to balance those things. But at Concert, one thing it's funny that hit me recently was we were just doing our head of people. We're just doing a benefit what do they call them? Renewal, right? When we have to redo our health insurance options and stuff. And I realized that there's 53 people on our health plan, right? And there'll probably be more than double that by the end of the year. Yeah. And it was one of those funny, I remember having this, with you a couple times at Reflection too. It's that moment when you're like, oh man, this isn't an idea anymore, right? This isn't like a vision and a PowerPoint and, some concepts. But, Verna and I, my co-founder and our chief operating officer at Concert, were like, holy moly. It was like, those many people relying on us. Not only do they have a paycheck from us, they're relying on us for their health insurance while they're providing exceptional healthcare to other people. And that was real. It's a fun moment. It's a gratification that you sort of say, man, that's awesome that we're now. A lot of people are joining this because it's a better job. It's a better career path. It's a better opportunity to make impact than if they were just working at a health system or a private practice or another thing. And that part feels really, really exciting and a good moment to sort of pause and remember all that you'd accomplished, when normally we're just thinking about, okay, what's next? How do we get better? How do we fix the problem? All those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think it's a shared experience at different scales, but it's like the magnitude of the experience of the person's the same. I'm just when I'm talking about whether you're leading a team of like 60 people or 50 people, or really leading a team of like 1 million. So I'm just thinking about Jeff Bezos's letter to his employees, and he's like, we have like 1 million employees, like we care about you, and it's a large responsibility. And I read that and I was like, Jesus, yeah, that is right. He actually does wake up and probably think about those people's lives as much as people don't want to think that he cares. He probably does. He cares a lot. And so do you, right? So it's like you don't have 1 million employees yet, but it's like nice to know you have something in common with this club of people who are moving forward on these ideas, right? But the story of Concert really requires the story of you. So if I could just back up and go and say, what is the story of Spencer Hutchins?
Grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, awesome little suburb of Boston, famous for where the Revolutionary War started. Although most importantly, it meant we had an awesome grassy area in the middle of town where we could play sports and hang out after school. Was really lucky in a lot of ways. Had a great childhood. Had early struggles in school because I have dyslexia and dysgraphia, and an amazing mom that identified that early and got me a lot of support. My friends were always smarter to them, but didn't have good grades or didn't succeed for a while. And by the time I sort of left high school, was in a much better spot. And so, that I think in many ways defined me, that struggle, that decision not to give up, that decision to get a bunch of help, which was really as much my mom advocating for me and my dad advocating for me than anything, and put me in an awesome spot. So, then did college up in Maine, decided Massachusetts wasn't cold enough, so I went to Colby, and had a blast there. Studied economics and political science and government, and that was graduated right in the first term of the Bush administration. I was sort of fascinated with policy and politics, and really not happy about the way he was governing the country, and so I ended up joining a presidential campaign and trying to get John Kerry elected president, which was a blast. So I joined that campaign after right after, really, I started working, interning with him when I was still in school, and then joined. I think my first title was senior intern in June, like 7 months before the New Hampshire primary, and 18 months before the general, and worked my butt off. I think I had a $400 a month stipend and lived with my parents, and got it, and that was awesome. You want to talk about an organization growing or whatever? I mean, running president's the craziest job interview in the world. I had my first event there, I remember, was organizing in Franklin, New Hampshire. 45 people showed up, and that was with my parents and like 8 of their Republican friends who were definitely going to vote for George Bush, but were just doing me a favor to show up to make sure I wasn't embarrassed by too small of a crowd. And then did that for a year and a half. And my last event in Tampa, Florida, where I ended up working in the general election, it was an outdoor rally with 20,000 people. He had a 70-car armada that took him from the airport to the event because he was, possibility that he was 3 days away from being the president-elect, and so they regarded him as if he was a president, like snipers on the roof and those things. And then you're remembering back, it's like, this is the same job interview back from that event in Franklin, where I was like MapQuest emailing MapQuest links to his driver that would come over and pick him up in a minivan and drive him up to New Hampshire so he could make fundraising calls on the drive up to this event where he's going to talk to 45 voters, in a VFW hall. So that was an absolute blast. Obviously did not have the outcome I wanted, which is we thought we were going to elect the next president. But did give me a really amazing view into organizing people. I mean, that's what campaigns are about. A couple million people that are willing to do more than just vote, right? They want to have yard signs or make phone calls or, wear a button or knock on doors or give rides to polls or show up food. And, a big part of what I was doing was trying to figure out how to turn that energy into things that productively get votes for a candidate. It was fascinating. It was like, just an opportunity. The promotion cycles on political campaigns were like, if you don't screw up on a 3-week window, you get promoted, right? Because you're growing so fast. And having been lucky about working for the one that ended up getting the nomination, so just kind of bigger and bigger, bigger. And I think on election day in Tampa, there was probably 3,000 volunteers working for me, 100 people that were getting paid something, all supporting on election day stuff. It was just a wild and exhausting and fun ride that didn't work out the way I wanted, but did professionally, but found my wife who was done the same journey, and met at a New Hampshire staff meeting that first summer, and we've been together pretty much ever since, and so worked out really great for me, if not quite for my candidate.
I thought you were going to say for Lori.
That was a blast. And then, I don't know, after that, I went to business school.
I want to pause, and I have a couple questions. Actually, it's funny. I've never actually asked you about these experiences as much as I should have in the past. When you're describing this entire experience, it just sounds so frenetic. It almost sounds like a Coachella that just kept going, right? Like for weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah. What was the hardest part about that? I mean, you must have been, how old were you when you joined his campaign?
So it was right after college. I was 22, I guess. Yeah, 22, 23.
And you'd never done anything to this scale or this pace before, I'm assuming.
No, I mean, I'd been a waiter, in summers. I worked at a retail store, but no, I mean, this is my first job.
How did you deal with just the stress of being thrust into the limelight and with such responsibility?
I don't know. It was fun. I mean, I think it's not for everybody, and obviously some people, but it's cool. I mean, the energy, from there is wild, particularly when you politics was not as central or as cool as it is now. This, pre-Obama, pre-Trump, a lot of things. Although there's a lot of energy because of the Iraq War, right? And that was, for those listeners in our generation may forget that, of like what that was like. But there, a lot of people just thought that's a disaster, and we got to change. And so there's a lot of energy, still a lot of rage, particularly when I was in Florida, of people that have been really involved in the 2000 election and thought that George Bush wasn't the rightful winner back then, and Al Gore should have been president. It's awesome. I mean, it's amazing. It's a lot of really awful stuff. I really have to psych myself up. I remember just hating phone calls, cold calls. That was a good lesson for startup world though, of like, you're just gonna, you had to be like, especially early in the campaign, you don't have a lot of volunteers yet. There's not a lot of energy. So, you might get one person to come phone bank with you or two people, but the only way you're going to hit your number, and tell your regional director that we made enough phone calls today was like, you're going to make 130 of them, and I was lucky. My mom was a great volunteer. So she was like always the supporter, and she'd make 200, I'd make 150, and someone else would make them. And then we'd hit our goal. And so there's a lot of monotonous work like that, but it's funny. You go from that and just, oh my God, I got a call, and most people are going to hang up on me, and they don't, Dean or John Edwards or, Wesley Clark. But then also you work on some event and it would be, front page of the newspaper the next day. It would be, maybe both of the local paper and the national paper. New York Times writers would be coming. And it's funny now when in a startup, you're focused on, hey, can I get TechCrunch to write about my fundraising, or can I get, somebody to do this, or, and it was funny that it was just normal back then to be doing this thing that, particularly as you advance in the campaign, get close to the primaries or close to the general election, that there would be hundreds of reporters on and and millions of people reading about it every day. Not as though they would read about me, but you're like, oh man, I helped put that stanchion there, right? Or I made sure the crowd was big enough, or hey, that big crowd, I make sure we got as many people as possible to sign up volunteer cards so we could call them again and get them to knock on doors the next weekend or something like that.
Do you think back then, if you had access to the same digital tools that people do now for marketing and elections, like Facebook and other social media, the result would have been different?
Yeah, it was. I would be fascinated. I went back in and I never did it again professionally full time, but like in 08 and in 12 would take like a week off and like fly back to New Hampshire and work the last week of the campaign or something. I haven't been able to do it the last couple, but it is funny as the talks are still in it, just how much of a transformation that's been. One, it was really early on the digital team. I remember it was like our first, there was this team, Ken Strasma, I think was his name. And we were losing really, really badly to Howard Dean for a part of it. But he had this ability. They had done this early big data experiment to figure out who's likely to be a Kerry supporter. And my understanding is they pulled in age, demographics, what magazines you had, and things like that. And he was giving us and our volunteers call lists that were targeted for people more likely to be our supporters. And I remember like the polls always had us down. We were down 15, 20 points at one point in the primary, but the call lists, we would, like at the end of the night, we'd identify about the same number of Kerry supporters as we did other people's, right? Either Dean or Edwards or Gephardt or Clark were those, for those folks, those probably names that people don't even remember anymore if they're not old enough. And I remember our volunteers were like, we're not losing. I know on the phones, like we're doing great. And I was like, I think there's a really smart person that figured some stuff out. And it's like some combination of and I remember it was like just scratching the surface. And so it's funny now, I think that level of sophistication is obviously through the roof on how you communicate. One thing I think that the Obama campaign pioneered, I think we're getting better and better about, is recognizing that a random stranger calling you is so much less effective than figuring out how to use social networks and actually people who really know people, neighbors really knocking on neighbors' doors and stuff, has a much bigger impact. It's a fascinating area. I do remember we used to have to physically cut turf, was what it was called, which was take lists of where you're going to knock on doors, and you had to print and photocopy a map, and highlight which streets they should go down. And then you'd have to find, like, essentially you can knock on like 80 doors in a shift, like on a Saturday morning. You can get like 2 people to show up. Here's 80 pieces of paper, go knock on 80 doors, ask them who they're going to vote for. If they're not sure, tell them why you're voting for John Kerry. And if they're not home, give them this little, pamphlet on their door. And now it's just like some buttons, right? And the system just push it out, and it was like, I remember there was a volunteer in New Hampshire, this one couple, and they would keep the maps of Concord, right? Of like what the good turf was and what streets you should put in the same packets. And it was all physical paper that they had in these huge binders. It was like a big part. They were professional activists. And that was so valuable at the time, the like received wisdom of which streets in Concord you could knock on in one shift, that they would get calls from the candidates to get their support. And it was like, why do you want Jim and Valerie on the team? It was like, just because their maps are so good. And now it's amazing because like you go back on a campaign now, they hit a button and it's like, boom, and it just print. It doesn't even print it out anymore. It pushes your thing to a smartphone app where your volunteer logs into, and then they have it and go run around and knock on first.
Yeah, that's fascinating. This whole story is interesting because it's a part of your life that I think whenever anybody at that age, whatever they're working on is pretty formative. So I think there's a lot of lessons here. And I think understanding you is like understanding this part of your life is really important, understanding you and actually all the stuff you've worked on downstream of that. So is John Kerry still on your speed dial? Or, I mean, I'm sure obviously everyone probably dispersed after that, went to do their own things.
No.
You'll keep in touch with that team?
No, I was never. I mean, it was funny. We were never. I mean, that's one of those things. I think aspiring people that love politics think like they're going to get into political campaigns, and you're going to be like advising people on messaging and what you're going to say at the debate. And I couldn't have been farther away from that. I was like, no. How are we going to make 5,000 phone calls tonight, right? How are we going to knock on doors? How do we get, because ultimately, the party organization I was in field, right, is really about how do you touch as many voters as possible to persuade them to vote for you. And then as you get closer to the election, it's less about persuading them to vote for you. And it's more about making sure that people who, if they vote, will vote for you, actually vote, right? And it turns into this mobilization effort. No, still close to. I mean, obviously with Lori, we still have a lot of friends from that era. It is funny going back to watching. He's back in the limelight, working for President Biden now. It's got now coming in on 20 years later, but glad and proud of the work he's doing on climate change. And he would. Definitely not remember me anymore.
So after,
I mean, there's not too many things other than a startup. I joined. I think I was probably employee 70. There was like 20 people in Iowa, 15 of us or so in New Hampshire, and then the campaign headquarters in Boston. And then a year and a half later, I don't know how many employees there were, but thousands and thousands. And then at least probably hundreds of thousands of pretty active volunteers. And so not too many startups have that growth. Now the money that's in campaigns, they're spending, by the end of it, your presidential campaigns are billion-dollar enterprises, and that they're things that didn't exist 2 years earlier. So it's pretty wild from a hyperscale perspective.
Yeah, it's weird. You're right. It is. I always used to use the, remember I used to say like filmmaking is really close to startups. It's like the same thing. It's like you have marketing and product and all the logistics and stuff. But thinking about what you just said, it's true actually, right? Campaigns are like that. You've just got to mobilize so many people toward a common purpose. Interesting. So from that phase of your life ended, you transitioned into Colby, or you were kind of at Colby at the time?
That was right after Colby. So it was right after undergrad, after I graduated. That was my first job. And then I had like lots of career plans. They all started with working for the president. And then we lost, right? So it was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to work for the president. So I was like, what the heck do I do? So, it was a tough time. I was exhausted, probably depressed, right? Clinically, and a little adrift. And then
When you say that,
I
though,
knew I wanted to have a.
I want to touch on that because it's just so relevant to today's discussion as well. But when you say clinically depressed, are you looking at that from, yeah, I was sad, or knowing what I know now as a CEO of a company that's doing mental health, I probably was clinically depressed.
Yeah, it's probably a combination, right? I didn't know then to give myself a PHQ-9. I do remember I was literally sleeping like 14 hours a day. And for the first few days, you can chalk that up to like, you're just literally that exhausted, and then at some point it was not a literal exhaustion thing. It was oh crap, I had so much purpose, so much energy in my life. And now, I think, for a couple of weeks, all you're doing is the really depressing work of like shutting the campaign down, right? You got to like return the photocopier and clean the office and give keys back and figure out what to do with yard signs and things. And so I was off the payroll around Thanksgiving, and drove up to my back home, and it was like, at that point, I'd been really blessed. I had a great college career. I got paid like crap, but a job that had a lot of like, purpose to it. It was exciting, something I was proud to tell my friends about. And now you're like, okay, I'm just like unemployed, and it was like, what the heck? And I loved the campaign experience, but I didn't think I wanted that to be my only career path. And always wanted something that sort of spanned the public and private sector. And when you saw people that did a lot of campaigns early, the way that they worked in the private sector was to be a lobbyist. Like, you get enough credibility and then you get hired by companies, but you're only hired because you did that campaign 10 years ago with the woman who's now the chief of staff to an important senator, or something like that. And that, I mean, some of those people that do that work, it's great work, but that wasn't what excited me about private enterprise, about companies. It was like, how do you solve problems of people, and how do you build teams and get things done? And so at some point pretty soon, I sort of decided that like business school was the right way to do that. It was like, I don't know how to go. If I go get a job at a company, it was like, I just had this world in which there was like hundreds of people working for me. I was organizing thousands, but it was like, you can't show up and get a job at a company and go like, get credit for that. It would be like, okay, maybe you're just a recent college grad, you'd be on the bottom. And I knew there was a lot I needed to learn and a lot I needed to, and a way to sort of stamp that credibility for what it was, which I thought was really important: early management, early leadership skills, and felt like an MBA was the right way to do that. So kind of like somewhere around December 1st, I started to say, I think I want to go to business school, and I didn't know anything about it. So I was like, okay, what are the business schools I can get into? What are the business schools? How do what are the tests you need to take? I think it was probably around there when I learned what the GMAT was. And then I spent the month of and then realized that all the application deadlines were sort of mid-January. So I spent all of December just like living with my parents, studying for the GMAT, and seeing if I can get my score high enough to get into the schools I wanted to go to.
Why is it that business school, like, no one ever really talks about business school or their business school experience? It just seems like this perfunctory set of things that they have to do, and then they exit out and they got the MBA. But I want to explore it just because I've never been to business school. There's a lot of people who are running successful businesses and are involved in businesses that have never been there. What was your favorite part of business school?
I loved it. I think it's always funny how different it is, though, than medical school, right? And it's such a different perspective in that it's like, if you graduate medical school, you're a doctor, right? And you can finish your residency, like you're a doctor. And that, like, it gives you this right to do something that you can't do unless you're in the school. Business school is so different. Like, you go to business school, it doesn't make you a business person, right? Like, and it doesn't make you successful, nor does the lack of having gone to business school make you unsuccessful. What you think it does a great job, what I loved is it gave me this understanding. Like, I had these leadership experiences, management and people experiences. I had an undergrad in econ, so I knew about, some sort of principles, but I knew nothing about accounting. I knew nothing about marketing. I knew, I knew nothing about, competitive dynamics with firms, right? And it was a fun way. It's classically the curriculum is good about making you an inch deep and a mile wide and all those sorts of things. So you certainly would not want me doing your accounting just because I took 2 accounting classes in business school, but I can like talk to accountants. I can understand them. I can use silly jargon like what's above the line and what's below the line, and that stuff's helpful. I think for me, and something that's really also, it's like a nice way to press pause on a life or an existing career path, get to learn a ton, meet a lot of great people, contemplate for a couple of years what it is you want to do when you grow up, and then use that MBA a little bit to like figure out how to position you in a path, of like, okay, where you want to go. And mine was kind of get some credibility for having worked on campaigns and stuff, but think of that more as general leadership management skills, and then find a way to get myself into, private enterprise, right? And so it ended up being amazing for me for that perspective. So I think probably what a lot of people do, I met some lifelong friends there, is my favorite time still, until COVID disrupted us, still did a annual ski trip that we started in business school, and I've done 13 straight years after with the same group of people, find a new mountain and do it. And so like everything in life, it's often the human connections which are the best.
And you went to Yale, and I bring that up because it seems like I'm not so sure how much this phenomena exists in medical school, because the thing with medical school is no matter where you are in the world, in any medical school, the curriculum is basically the same. Anatomy doesn't change depending on the decade or the economic or the professor teaching it, right? But I feel like business school is different. The professors you have at the specific school who have their own theories on economics and business development and so on and so forth can really shape your views on things. Do you feel like you came across a professor or an instructor that really to this day has helped form how you think about things like startups and the economy and growth?
Yeah, I had quite a few folks that were important to me. I mean, probably my favorite professor, Barry Nailboff, is an economist, really strong academic, theoretical work around game theory. When I met him, I think he was a very popular professor, been tenured forever, name share, that sort of stuff. But I think by some of the class was thought of as like this absent-minded professor, academic that like doesn't really know business. He had, however, co-founded a company called Honest Tea, which was a very early stage thing that was being sold in cafes in New Haven in a couple of places with a student, maybe, I don't know, 5 years earlier than me or something like that. And now everyone knows Honest Tea because it did really well. And they sold to Coke for like a whole lot. And he's now done a couple other beverage startups. And it was fascinating, partly that his idea was like very classic, using theory to talk about how there was this space in the market between totally unsweetened tea and stuff that was essentially melted candy bars. And that, his basic, I remember him talking in class about his basic idea is like, we can create a better product than Snapple. And he's like, we just need to get big enough before they notice that we're going to matter, that we have a brand, and he even back then was like, they were already having some success back when I was doing it, but it was like, and it was we're gonna, he's like, you got to get to 50 million in sales, because if you're younger than that, if you're smaller than that, Coke and Pepsi don't know what to do. But once you get to that phase, you can get distribution from one of the existing things, and then they know how to skyrocket you. And so they did that. They got themselves there. I don't understand the transaction, but I think they had a bidding war. I think they did well. And then I don't know if Coke bought them or bought part of them or something. And then like 2 years later, they're in every gas station, every grocery store, every place. And every time I go to a kid's birthday party in pre-COVID era, there's little Honest Kids lemonade there, which is like expensive and a little less unhealthy than Snapple. And it was like, man, it's funny. And I think that taught me half of it. I mean, he never operated the businesses, and there's so much about starting companies, which isn't the sexy idea, isn't the insight, it's the grind, right? But, I remember him a lot. I loved his classes, learned a lot, and that clarity of thinking about, how do I think about industries? How do I think about goals, and what's my opportunity there?
Yeah.
And I always love those stories about, the founding story, as I remember it, was that he and Seth came back from India with some tea that was organic, and they had a little high quality sugar, and they made their first batch. I think they might have literally taken a Snapple bottle or something, taken the sides off, brewed it, shaken it, and then started to bring it to people, and was like, would you give them a sip of this stuff? And it was like, if we can figure out how to make this, would you sell it? And they were doing that in natural food stores in New Haven. Their biggest win was, I think, because Professor Nailbuff was a tenured professor at Yale and knew people and all that stuff. I think they got a meeting with the CEO of Whole Foods, and that was the big break, was if we could figure out how to manufacture this with scale, would you put it in some of your stores and see if it works? And they had it. It was like, yeah, it tastes pretty good. Let's do it. And it was off. And I think I love that. I didn't leave business school knowing I was going to do startups or be an entrepreneur. But, now looking back, you could see some of the excitement from that story certainly colored maybe my career and my choices.
Yeah, egg on the face of those students who thought he was absent-minded. The guy seemed actually pretty damn clear, right?
I know. No, it's funny. I mean, he had this, curly hair, and he was like that classic, he'd bring all these papers in, he's losing stuff and all over. But yeah, it was, some people were kind of, it's like, oh, sometimes in business school there are people that feel like, oh, the academic stuff, I don't really want to do that. What I want to do is learn from a retired investment banker or someone at McKinsey, because that's where I want to go, right? And it was, but no, this guy was like, pretty good. I mean, I think there's another chair at Yale named for him, because he could donate enough money to the university after that. So, I think probably he's got a different esteem now when people startups are cool, and he's got a lot more street cred.
I've never asked you this before, but actually, I mean, do you ever wonder if you could, if that could be part of your job? I mean, would you want to be or take on some kind of visiting professor role or teach a class or be involved in the academic part of business?
I think that's fun. I mean, I think teaching, motivating people is great. I mean, it's a real discipline in and of itself. I remember from business school, some of those people that weren't really academics or teachers, they were just, a lot of them were like, I've been really successful, I want to do something fun and I'll teach. Some of them were amazing. Some of them were awful, because the discipline of teaching is really important. How do you thoughtful, how do you think about a lesson plan? How do you understand how to motivate and teach, and explain and those sorts of things. And, but yeah, I mean, I think that stuff's fun. I mean, I think finding ways to get connected with young people that are smarter than you, is just incredibly energizing always, whether or not that's as building a company, staying connected with recent college grads that you're hiring, or doing things like teaching. I think those sorts of things can be inspiring. I would love to do them. I think I get a lot of value out of it at a time that I have. Whether or not I'd actually be good enough at it that it would make sense for the students to listen to me for a couple hours a week, I don't know.
So you flew through Yale and you really loved it, which is awesome. And then what was your next move?
So after grad school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, because it turns out you just take accounting classes and marketing classes, and you have spent some time on a campaign. I was really tempted to join Barack Obama's presidential campaign. A friend of mine was the number 2 in the New Hampshire campaign. I actually took a week off school and helped them organize the first couple events. And almost sort of did it. So I said, I'm going to be the campaign guy.
You're like, this feels really familiar here.
Yeah.
I'm good at this.
I was really inspired by him. And I was like, but I just said, you know what? that'll turn me into like the campaign operative that got an MBA. And I just said that I think it's going to make it hard to not follow that path. At that point it was probably like, he's probably going to lose to Hillary, whatever. I'll never work for the president, So who knows? So stayed excited about him, but then decided not to take that path. And then did the classic punt, which is become a management consultant, right? Because it's like, if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, it's like a high-paying, interesting, prestigious thing that is really like applied business school. And ended up finding a small firm called Katzenbach Partners. John Katzenbach had been a long-time director at McKinsey, and he and a few people left and formed a small firm. It was maybe, I think, 8 years old when I joined or something. It was maybe 50 or 60 people, and was lucky enough, almost got an internship there and got turned down, and then got in touch and was fortunate to graduate in 2007, which was before the economy started to be terrible and everybody was hiring a lot. I think, one thing that's amazing, if I had graduated business school during a recession, right? So if I had been an 2009 grad, not 2007 grad, I probably would have been just screwed, because I had such a more limited professional base that it would have been really hard to get interviews. But I was lucky that a lot of people were hiring, and got that job at Katzenbach Partners and started, which was awesome. Still really close friends, a lot of people there. And I can tell a story as though I always knew that healthcare startup innovation was going to be the way to do private sector work in a public spirited way. And it's like a plan. But the reality was I just happened to get staffed on a hospital case early at Katzenbach and was like, this is cool. Children's hospitals, fascinating, complex businesses. What could be better than working to try to help, them think about their strategy, take care of kids better, right? And then happened to get staffed on some other tech companies, just like the partners that I worked for, and was servicing some big, computer or storage or other businesses. And for the first couple of years of my consulting career, it was just kind of like two parts of my brain. One was like, 2/3 of the time I was doing healthcare stuff, and 1/3 of the time I was doing technology stuff. I wasn't an expert in either. I was becoming good at making PowerPoint decks and doing analysis and like getting ready for executive meetings and all those things that management consultants do. And then had a chance, two things happened. My small firm, Katzenbach Partners, got bought by Booz Company, which is a much larger firm, which has now been acquired by PwC. But Booz had a really, really strong healthcare practice. And during the recession, they had when was that? Maybe 2009, they had so 2 years into my career, they had a sabbatical program because they had laid off a bunch of people because the economy was bad and their business was shrinking. But then they also wanted to like cut people down, but cut the layoffs down, but they needed to get rid of payroll without wanting to fire people. And about that time, I was getting introduced to some people that were starting a healthcare team at the Federal Communication in the Obama administration. And they needed someone that knew a little bit about tech, a little bit about healthcare to help. There's a small team that's going to advise the commissioner of the FCC on kind of how to make sure they didn't mess up the number one domestic priority, which was, the Affordable Care Act, or what we now call Obamacare. And so it's just like, got super lucky that got this opportunity and almost got to combine two parts of my brain that hadn't been together and go work for a president that I was excited about and admired, and make it work financially, because I didn't actually have to quit at Booz, and I got enough of my salary from that and my health benefits that plus the government wage let me still pay rent and all that kind of stuff. And so I ended up doing that for about 9 months.
It's interesting when you think of like healthcare, and you don't immediately think of the FCC, right? Like, and what kind of role they would even play in any national rollout of any healthcare program. But can you just give us an idea of how important that role actually is?
It was fascinating. I mean, that was the reason we needed some people. We had to write this thing called the National Broadband Plan, which was sort of stuck into the stimulus bill. But most of that was about a strategy to get broadband everywhere, right? But parts of it were around certain national purposes, is what they called it. So energy, education, healthcare, right? Things that are really important priorities generally and priorities for a democratic administration. How do we think about the role of connectivity? Ended up being kind of two areas. One was the iPhone was pretty new then, and people were I don't think, Haley Tacco and others hadn't come up with the name digital health. We were calling it something, right? But there was this concept of, was the iPhone going to be regulated as a medical device if someone wrote software on it that touched a medical device or had something to do with healthcare? And no one knew, right? The FDA, regulated drugs and it regulated devices. And some of those devices have software in them, right? Pacemakers have software in them that runs the hardware. So they were really used to, okay, I know how to regulate pacemaker software, but that felt like it was gonna be pretty different than an iPhone app, right? That was tracking your calories. And it was what are we gonna do there? And so mostly the role that we got to play was the FDA was almost certainly going to stay, and ended up staying the primary regulatory body for that. And we now have a whole apparatus about how kind of digital health is regulated by the FDA. But it was trying to get the chairman and some people at the FCC to be at the table, so the regulatory mindset landed somewhere between the traditional FDA and traditional FCC, which is the FDA's approach with a pill, right? Is you have to do all these trials, you have to tell us about the trials, it's so much, you go public before you even have revenue, right? I mean, it's this huge process, but it's all about asking permission, right? The FCC's approach to cell phones is get the industry together, get them to self-regulate, and then we'll find out if it's a problem or not, right? These questions about whether or not having your cell phone in your pocket is going to cause testicular cancer or, those sorts of things. It's much of a let the industry do it, have consortiums to look at it. And we knew that was probably too hands-off for where we should land, but maybe getting the FCC at the table with the FDA would get it to land in a place to say, hey, we need to bring some of the speed and simplicity of software lifecycle, software innovation to allow this industry to be created. So I was several degrees away from those decision makers or whatever, but it was fun to be pushing. And it was, in practical ways, it was really where do we need to get Chairman Janikowski invited to, right? Or some senior person at the FCC, just what meeting should they show up at? So we're not just thinking about how will we regulate this the same way we do a pacemaker, but how will we think about a third way or a new way? That was a blast. The other thing the FCC does is it subsidizes broadband to rural hospitals, spends a bunch of money. It's stuff that we've done since the 19-teens. You know how your cell phone bill, they say it's going to be $59.99, and then it's $87 or whatever.
Yeah.
That thing in the middle is called the universal service fee, and it used to be government fees that essentially subsidize AT&T building telephone wires everywhere so that America could be the first place where you can have a telephone everywhere. And over the years, there's been more than just getting phone access. And part of it was getting internet connections, or originally phone lines and then internet connections out to rural hospitals. And we were trying to do a little bit on making that program more in line with what the stimulus bill did around getting people to digitize health records, right, and health information exchange and stuff like that. We frankly, I don't think made a huge difference there.
Yeah, but I think it was interesting to have those, that those conversations we're having between two large organizations that have a lot of bureaucratic layers, because those things take time. I mean, if you think about it, that just wasn't that long ago. When you were talking about the iPhone was still new, that was 2007. I mean, I remember having a
So this was 2009. We were probably iPhone 2. The App Store was becoming a real thing, and some early people, you started in this space, digital health space, a little earlier than me. This is you were thinking about it, and some early innovators are I can use these. I can make an app that does something clinical, that influences behavior, that tracks data, that does something. And it was just super early.
It was an obvious play from the very beginning. I think people in the digital health space kind of just weirdly, they by definition have become disillusioned or just frustrated. That comes from an area of frustration wherever of how things are, the status quo is being run. For me, it was the hospital system and how we saw patients and handled data and made decisions, and it just didn't make sense to me. Especially when you come home and you have other services like the iPhone. You're I'm using all these digital tools to do everything else in my life, and they seem to be a lot easier. it's just ridiculous that I have to go back and use Windows, whatever, 3.2 or whatever, in your to take care of patients in the hospital. So it's like, wait, we can do better. So it seems like it's always born out of some frustration versus some huge insight. But just looking back at these moves you're making here through these organizations and through school and campaigns, how much of this was, hey, this is the next, you're really clear about your next strategic move and you want to get to a certain goal, versus I'm getting like the other extreme, which is I'm just getting super lucky and getting pulled into these things and I keep saying yes?
Yeah, way more super lucky for sure. It's funny, there's a great healthcare MBA program at Yale, right? Our mutual friend, Nicole Bormanan, was in it at the same time I was there, but we didn't know each other. And it's funny, I'm like, man, I should have taken those classes. This stuff's fascinating. Like, there's all these really smart professors, Howie Foreman there, that does great work, interesting stuff. And I was like, man, I should have taken those. And I had I didn't know. I had this true north, which was, I didn't just want to do lobbying. I just didn't want government stuff, but I wanted a career that was going to make a difference in people's lives. And I think my own superpower was that kind of that problem solving that Barry Nailbuff loved to do and talk about in competitive strategy classes and stuff. And that thing was fascinating. And so it's like, it ended up, it's just insane luck, in a lot of these roles, but it was, have a fun career that you advance, you're super successful, all that stuff that I wanted, but also in a way that you felt like you could be, your success was aligned with making the world a little better place. And always had this sort of interaction with fascination with government and policy and the way that is. Healthcare just ended up being like, wow, that's it. It's like super complex in ways that work to our detriment in a lot of ways. Both the human body is insanely complex, and the healthcare system we put around it in the United States is like almost as complex. And then you mash those two together and it's like a lot of complexity. So that's like intellectually fascinating and challenging to me. And that I think particularly now, even more so than 10 or 20 years ago, building a big business in the healthcare system is more aligned with taking great care of people, making them better, saving people money, getting them healthier. That hasn't always been true. It's always been true about being a clinician, in healthcare. It's not always been true about building a business in healthcare. but I think these trends that the Affordable Care Act was part of accelerating help do that, and where I just sort of got and found lucky. But that, like, getting, it's crazy. I'm remembering it was the reason I got that job at the FCC was like an old friend of mine call. He was my first boss in the campaign when I was an intern. He had gotten a call about it. He had just graduated business school, didn't want to leave, or was still in business school or something. And he was like, I don't want to leave to take this gig, but hey, Spencer, you'd be great for it if you're interested, right? And I got connected with Mo Kushel, right? Did this like quick interview, and he was like, hey, you seem smart. You seem like you know how to do some stuff, and like, hey, you want to come down and work in DC? And I was like, yeah, that seems neat. And it was like, so
knowing Mo, that's
crazy,
probably
fortunate, random, lucky,
Yeah, I think you're being exactly, like, that's word for word. I can imagine that's exactly like what he said, right? Like, exactly. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then like everybody, I was charmed by the British doctor, right? The British Indian doctor that had that great accent and said, hey, we're going to go down, we're going to do some cool stuff. He'd been doing venture capital work before, right? So
no,
I was hook, line, and sinker.
No, that is the missing piece of my portfolio. If I was from Britain, if I just, I call them Brindians, British Indians. They're just like the most charming Indians you can get. I can't, you can't, it's their peak charm. It's unfortunate. Anyway, so it's interesting because you're taking these opportunities. Now, I know that we're going to delve into the digital health space pretty deep here, but before that, I just want to give an opportunity. Management consulting gets a bad rap. I mean, to the point where you have TV shows that are making fun of it, right? That are satirical. Yeah. Here's your opportunity to set the record straight.
I loved it. It was great for me. I learned a huge amount. I met some really talented people. Most of the projects I work on, I was proud of, and we made a difference. But, it's an interesting discipline. I mean, I can understand why I think in many ways, they, along with investment banking, you know, one of their core competencies in the industry, the original one was like, we should use math to make decisions. And people didn't used to do that. But now everyone knows that. Like, you should track data, you should use them.
Right.
You don't need a management consultant to use a spreadsheet, right? The second real innovation they had was we should find really, really smart people from school and pay them a lot of money, train them a lot, and then charge them out to big companies at a 7 times markup on what we're paying them, you know, and use, so that was awesome because they really invest in training, they really invest in thought, but I think a lot of other people are catching up to that too, you know, and, you know, it's an interesting, I mean, there's some great work that happens. I've got some friends that ended up staying in it a long time that have been really proud of their work. You know, it's just this week, the news hit that McKinsey is paying hundreds of millions of dollars to taxpayers now to settle the OxyContin grossness that happened. And
Yeah,
the vast majority of people at McKinsey didn't do that, right? It's a dozen gross people or something. That most of their work they do is incredibly ethical, and people that do that work are trying to do the right stuff, but it's gross. But I think in reality, I mean, a lot of those projects, they get paid a lot of money to fight internal wars inside organizations, right? One VP wants to do something, but they need to fire people, but they don't want to blame themselves, so they hire a consultant to tell them to fire people, right? Or you know, they want some protection with their board or something like that, so they have someone else do it. So sometimes that brings a lot of insight. Sometimes it's like the answer is already known before you start, and they pay you $400,000 to make a PowerPoint, which is, you know, so I think some people find great careers there. It's high paced. If you like to travel a lot and do that, if you like a new problem every time, it's great. But for me, what ended up being, I knew it wasn't my long-term career. I just wasn't wired to be an advisor, right? It was like, you know, 4 months in, 5 months in, it's like, I think I really know what to do here. We could make a difference. And then you're like, see you later, good luck. And you're like, oh, but they're not going to understand this. You know, there's all these things that you say, they're going to mess up my recommendation. The other reality is probably you actually only know it at 10,000 feet. And there's so much more complexity if you get to the ground level, and you're not actually solving the whole problem because you never got there before you have to move on.
Yeah, and you seem like you were task switching a lot too. Like you said, most of it was in healthcare, but then like in 1 week you're like in Azerbaijan working on an oil pipeline or something like that. You're like, what am I doing here?
Or something like, exactly. I mean, sometimes it's just preposterous, right? I mean, you know, you've either, you know, a lot of people that are more advanced in their career have seen the bad side of this, was just like some executive hires some fancy management consulting firm, but then really what you find out, it's like a 25-year-old that didn't know what your industry was 2 months ago, that's like making a deck to give you a recommendation. It's like, come on, you know, you're not really bringing insight. So sometimes that outside perspective, divergent thinking, you know, things from other industries can be helpful. Other times it's like, you know, hey, you don't know enough here.
So I want to I want to give you the opportunity to really transition into telling us the story of Concert. I know you were involved in some digital health things before, and you and I worked together on projects, but can you describe how you transition through those projects into Concert?
Yeah, so, you know, you and I had a great run at Reflection. I think did some great work, but, you know, had kind of an unsatisfying ending, right? You know, which, without getting into all the details, it was the company, there's a lot that had worked, but not everything, you know, and a lot of unfinished work. And we had some big disagreements with the majority owner. You know, when you don't, even though we had fancy titles, CEO and chief medical officer, co-founder, right? When you don't own the company, you don't own the company, right? So you know, at some point, all you get to decide is whether or not you're going to keep showing up to work, right? And we didn't. So I left that with really two passions. One, three things, right? I knew I loved starting things. It was like, that's fun, I caught the bug. So let me go start something, and let me go prove that I can do this right the next time, you know. The second was, I think that you and I at Reflection kind of pre-decided that was going to be a software company, because it's like, that's what you do when you're in California, and the software in healthcare sucks. But you know, what we learned at Reflection was always like, well, yeah, but to make it work, we need to make great software, but we need to get the physical, that was in the MSK space, right? So we need to get the physical therapists to act differently. Oh, it's hard to get them to act differently without paying them differently. differently, right? And then, I got to get them to work with the surgeon differently. And yeah, this great software platform that, our team built was part of it, but so much of the win was this practice redesign mismatch. And so I think I left saying, listen, I think almost certainly any business is a technology company now, but let me just go solve a problem that I'm passionate about, and then decide what type of business it's going to be, right? Not prejudge it to be, I'm going to sell software. And I thought in a lot of cases, particularly if you're focused on people that are really sick, and you think of this in your own life, like when a family member is really sick, I don't rush to the app store to find out like what's the best app, right? I call you, right? Or I call 3 doctor friends and I'm like, okay, this is what's wrong. Who's the doctor that knows a lot? Or who's the psychologist, the therapist that knows a lot about this space? And let me get smart. But what do? I mean, you put your hands in, how do I find the best clinician to trust, right? For my parents, for my loved ones, for whatever. And so I think if you end up building a business that's going to solve a problem of helping take care of people that are really sick better, it's got to include a lot of clinicians, and that I think led me down to sort of say, hey, maybe we'll actually build, what the tech jargon would be as a tech-enabled services business, right, or a provider organization. Still be a startup, still do things, still try to build a big company, still maybe take venture capital investment, but do it in a way that is authentic to how do you solve the problem. And then finally, based on that experience, it was like, okay, I want to control my own destiny, and that was going to be bootstrapping from the beginning. So, we spent some time advising some companies, trying to pretend that I was an impressive entrepreneur when really I was an unemployed guy, what the next adventure would be. And that was kind of a maybe 6-7 month journey until I found my way to this program in Colorado, which is now called X-Genesis, and kind of discovered a clinical model of care called collaborative care management, which fascinated me and really became the nugget of what has become Concert Health.
Well, can we dissect that 6 to 7 month period that you talk about? Because I think, again, another really formative period, right? Where maybe a lot of other people should invest in. It almost seems like you went through a spiritual professional journey there, right? Where you were exploring, learning.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is really lucky that I married up back there on the Kerry campaign and found Lori. And I remember, when we were deciding to leave Reflection, it was like we were taking a path, and it was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have some version of quitting or getting fired, and it's probably going to happen next week, and they were wanting us to stay, wanting us to do some stuff with kind of golden handcuff type stuff. And it was kind of a F you. It was a this isn't consistent with my priorities or my values. And I think the better answer is to walk away. But lucky to do that because I had a wife that supported me and a wife that works. And we had been lucky to have already bought our house. We had a decent little nest egg, not as big as we would have loved, but something. And it wasn't like, if I don't have this paycheck, I got to have a paycheck in 2 weeks or else I can't make rent and I can't pay my mortgage. So I was really lucky to both have that support and her to say, you'll figure it out, but it was a lot. I mean, you and I, it was some legal stuff that we had to fight through, and that was super distracting and demoralizing. Now when other people have that moment, whether or not it's as painful as what ours was or others, I give them the advice to not do what I did, which is I pretended I was still working. I'd go to a coffee shop at 9:30, stay there till 4. I was on email all the time, setting up meetings, doing calls. But I was I wasn't really ready to jump into something, but what I should have done is actually take a month or two off and just been a dad to my young kid at that point, or, traveled or done something. And I kind of stayed in this bridge in which I kind of wanted to maintain the fiction that I was still busy when I wasn't really ready to dive in. I actually needed some time to just calm down and heal and figure out what I wanted to do. But, a couple of ideas that I kicked around. There's one friend of mine that I had met. We wanted to start a palliative care business together. Got excited about it, had a bunch of conversations, but kind of couldn't get anybody to buy it. and so like it was like it never became a company. It was an idea. There was a deck. There was a lot of time spent on it. I was still excited. I still think we could have done something good, but it was like, it wasn't quite clicking. Like we couldn't find that this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to make money. This is how we're going to generate value. So ended up putting that to the side. And then that summer came across collaborative care management and this kind of model of how do you integrate behavioral health services into primary care. And I was just fascinated by how much it made sense and how great the evidence base was, and their stuff would line up a little bit quicker.
So explain to me like I'm a 5-year-old. I mean, just what really clicked about this collaborative care model?
Yeah, so basically, the core insight of the psychiatrists and others that created the model was they said, listen, there's not enough psychiatrists. Nobody wants to come see us. So even if you can see one, you don't want to come. And it was a dumb idea to think that we should treat depression separately from everything else, right? Because it's like it's not separate. Your head is not disconnected from your body, right? Your diabetes and your depression aren't separate. They're feeding off one of each other. They're making each other worse, and they're making each other harder. And so you got to manage it together. And so, that said, hey, we need. The reality is primary care physicians need to be managing the majority of depression and anxiety because they're managing the rest of the stuff, and there's not enough psychiatrists. You can't just send everyone with depression out. The other core insight of what became collaborative care was the recognition that we have a lot of evidence-based treatment for depression and anxiety, but nothing that works for everybody. So it's not this neat decision tree like, okay, you have this, I give you this med, or you do this thing and you'll get better. It's like, no, there's a bunch of therapy interventions, behavioral activation, motivational interviewing, problem-solving therapy, right? And dozens. There's a bunch of meds that work. Right, there's different types of SSRIs, this is NRIs, right? All these other things, but the reality of best-in-class care is you need to one is make sure you're only doing the stuff that's evidence-based. You don't do kind of stuff that doesn't work. But even if you are doing stuff that does work, you have to find out if that's working for that person. It's some motivation. Are they receptive to that med, right? Biochemically, what are the side effects to that medication, and is that something they can put up with? What form of therapy are they willing to start? Are they willing to go on a journey with, and what ends up actually having a mechanism? And so the core insight, and not only do primary care physicians need to be central, it needs to be integrated, but you need to have, what I like to call an engineering mindset, which is you are constantly evaluating symptom severity, and then you're judging your success against that. And if whatever intervention you're doing isn't making the symptoms get better, then you got to do a new intervention, right? And so, what collaborative care is to say, listen, you need to be screened in your primary care office, which is just essentially every year you should get this basic survey or these other ways in which you can find out. Don't just ask someone, don't expect a person to just ask their doctor for a referral for therapy, or to say, I think I'm depressed, or to be obviously weeping in the office or something like that, right? Because that only is going to catch 20%. So you need some way to ask people structured questions. Hey, are you sleeping well? What's your energy level? Have you thought in the last couple of weeks about that you'd be better off dead, right? Those kind of questions. You have to ask them systematically around every year for everybody and around major health events, because a lot of people are going to say, yeah, I kind of am sleeping like crap. And yeah, like my mood's really bad and I don't see friends anymore. And you got to answer that, and their score will pop up on that. It's like, okay, we need to talk about this person because they might not realize it, or they might not be ready to vocalize it, but they're struggling, and we should and can help them. And then you can make it easy for it to happen. You don't need to say, I have depression, I'm going to go see a therapist. Your primary care doctor can say, hey, Spencer, looks like you're having trouble sleeping. I'd love to introduce you to a woman named Jennifer. And she helps me with a lot of my patients who are doing the same thing. And I'd love her to reach out to you in between my visits. She could do it on the phone. She could do it on a video visit, whichever's easier for you, and just check and see how things are going. If I want a therapist, you can say, hey, Jennifer's my in-house therapist. But if I don't want a therapist, I don't think I need one. It's just Jennifer's part of my team, right? She's a really talented clinician, and she can do it. For some people, she'll just check in on meds. Are you taking them? How's it making you feel? Symptom monitoring. Sometimes it'll be full-on psychotherapy, and sometimes it'll be somewhere in the middle. The patient probably doesn't think it's therapy or doesn't describe it you're doing goal setting together, you're getting them to exercise more, you're getting them to reach out to friends more, things like that, which is derivatives of cognitive behavioral therapy that we know works, but doesn't need to get into the language of, I recognize I have depression, I need a therapist. It's just, I need to sleep better, I need better energy, I need to be engaged with my friends. And that's the world that we all live in as people. We don't diagnose ourselves normally first. It's like, here's the problem in my life, and great. And a primary care team enabled by a collaborative care model has that care manager, what we call behavioral care manager. Those are like a licensed social worker that's doing that, the Jennifer, in this example I just gave you. Then the other part of the model is each week, each of our Jennifers, each of our care managers gets a 1-hour superpower, which is they talk to one of our psychiatrists or psychiatric nurse practitioners, reviewing the information on who's not getting better. Whose depression scores or anxiety scores aren't getting better, whose suicidality risk isn't falling. And then they just get their heads together and say, if it's not working, what do we change? Do we have the diagnosis wrong? Do we have the med wrong? Do we have the therapy wrong? Are we asking the wrong questions? And just sort of saying, we're responsible for getting that patient better. So if what we're doing is not working yet, we got to change something, right? And then have that accountability to come together. The psychiatrist not taking over the care from the primary care physician, but there as a consultant, there as a guider. So what they would do in practice is during that 1 hour, they have the EMR of the PCP pulled up. And if they have a recommendation on a new med, a different diagnosis, they write it as a note to the primary care physician for them to act on. So PCP, she stays the quarterback, she stays the prescriber, but with a lot more support behind her, both on just people keeping dibs on patients, finding out who's getting better, who's not, intervening on the psychotherapy side, and then having someone that can help her make medication diagnosis decisions for those folks and know when someone needs more support than they can be provided in primary care, and be the bridge to get them into a different level.
Why do you feel so strongly that the primary care, the center of the Venn diagram here still has to be primary care? Everything you're saying about this model, for example, makes a lot of sense. Right. It actually calls attention to the fact that the broken way we were doing it before doesn't make a lot of sense, because this idea of treating, the body is a system. It's not like it's not a bunch of machinery, with a soul in the brain. Like I think how some psychologists sometimes see it. It's like these things are interconnected. So it makes a lot of intuitive sense, and probably makes a lot of intuitive sense to patients. Like when you talk to patients, you go, you're not sleeping well. You're like, of course not. I feel depressed all the time. They're like, why don't you doctors get this? Like that's the kind of interactions I've had with patients when dealing with this. They're confused on why we don't get it, and we don't get it as physicians because we're because of other outside issues like logistics, the way we build medical schools, the training, the complexity of the brain versus complexity of other organ systems. We've siloed it into different modules, and then we decide to go train in these different modules that we like to practice in. But why do you feel like primary care still needs to be at the center of this?
Well, a few things. I think the patient needs to be at the center, for sure, right? This needs to be patient-centric. Why primary care physicians being the primary entry point or coordinator? A couple reasons. There's enough of them, right? So we have enough primary care physicians to see most people in the country. And we don't have enough psychiatrists. So there's no answer in which everybody with depression sees a psychiatrist for half an hour every other week. We won't have enough. Second is this issue of they're the only ones that, when done right, are kind of able to see the whole picture, right? And recognize how your behavioral health symptoms are interacting with the rest of your chronic conditions. They're that broad quarterback. The third is the trust that many of them have with patients, right? And so people will go see their, not everybody, certainly younger people are less likely to be connected. But for a lot of folks, they'll come there and they wouldn't ever seek out or want a therapist or a psychiatrist, but that's the place you can identify and realize that's something they're struggling with, and support them, right? To be your, the jargon or the lingo would be your real medical home. I mean, I'm inspired by the work that others are doing just to build new types of psychotherapy businesses, whether or not they're online, like the Teledocs and the Liras, or reimagining the in-person experience, like 2 Chairs or Foresight were some exciting companies. And there's a lot of people that don't have venture funding, don't have a brand, but they just do great work as therapists operating independent. And it's not a one size fits all, but if we're gonna say everybody in this country deserves access and deserves great care, I think primary care has to be a really important entry point for that, particularly for those people where their behavioral symptoms, conditions are one of a panoply of medical issues that they're dealing with.
So Concert really is your way of bundling up all these services and methodologies and protocols to apply them to health systems.
Yeah, and we started it because we found out, so, back in 2016 when I got, the idea was amazing. So not only, you talk about it, it's like it makes sense, but there's a lot of things in medicine that make sense, and then we study them rigorously, and then it'll work. You've taught me this, right? The importance of evidence building, of randomized control studies, of these things. There's very few health services interventions that I think have as good of a track record of being rigorously proven. There's something like 80 prospective randomized control studies that have demonstrated this model outperforms primary care by itself, outperforms traditional behavioral health in all sorts of different populations, different geographies, different ages. It's gotten repeated over and over again. And that is what clicked, because it was, I think this is frankly the thing that you taught me, right, is that matters. Evidence building matters. It matters to doctors, it matters to health plans, and it should matter. And this was like, not only does this intuitively make sense, but it actually feels like it has the burden of proof. It has the evidence. I'm like, why aren't I getting this care? Why aren't my family getting this care? Why aren't my friends? Why aren't people across the country getting this? And I started to get fascinated by that. And it wasn't too long after that I heard that Medicare was going to create a reimbursement schema for it. So create a new code, right, in our lingo, which means something you can send in and they'll send you back money, right? But to do it, you needed to, instead of paying everybody separately, the model was to pay one payment into primary care on a monthly basis. But primary care had to have assembled this 3-person team of Avengers: the PCP, the behavioral health provider, what we call the behavioral care manager, and the site consultant. You needed to show that you were built a patient registry and you were tracking outcomes. You needed to show that you were focused on treat to target approaches and that you were documenting that. And, you needed to show how much time you were spending per patient per month, because the codes were billed based on how much time you spent. And then it was like, oh man, that's it. Like, starting at that point, it was like in 6 months, in 7 months, there's going to be a way to get paid for this. For the first time, for everybody that's over 65 in America, and it was like, but then it said, if we are going to ask each doctor to figure this out, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for 30 years, because they don't even, it's like a code goes live. Great. It's like on some press release somewhere. Yeah. It shows up in reports. They don't know it, and then even after they know the code's live, it's like, well, what is this? They got to go study the model, learn about it. Then as a business, make a decision that I'm going to get into the business of hiring social workers and psychiatrists, figuring out how to do this, figuring out how to staff it, figuring out how to bill it. And then it'd be the right, and it's like, man, that's a lot of times they could say, I'm too busy. I don't know how to do this. So it's like, what happens if we built an organization that was the easy button for them? And said, and that was when the realization was, we actually need to build a medical group, right? It's not, yes, there's going to be a care management platform. Yes, there's going to be software, but I don't think all the primary care offices out there are like, I'm dying to hire social workers. I'm dying to hire psychiatrists. I'm going to become an expert on how to bill and this model. But you know what I really need is a SaaS license for a slick product that lets me manage my patients. It's like, no, the problem's bigger than that. The problem's deeper than that. And so that's when it became clear I needed to co-found this with a clinical leader, right? Not a technology, not just a technologist. And what we decided pretty quickly in that exploration was that we need to make this work, we need to employ phenomenal clinicians and create a great career path for them. And that's when we knew Concert Health would be a provider organization, not a SaaS company.
Yeah, but Spencer, when I'm listening to this, I mean, amazing work with what you've done so far. But I again want to focus. I want to ask you a little bit more about how you went from 0 to 1 on this, because you used the term Avengers. It took Marvel about $5 billion, 5 movies, and lots of logistics to get
Yeah,
the Avengers together in that
sure.
fictional universe. You just described 3 or 4 different types of providers, 5 actually, in addition
Yeah,
to other co-founders and things. How were you able to? I mean, you're going from I need to take some time off to figure out what I wanted to do. I went to a conference, got really
yeah, yeah.
inspired. You're forming this Rube Goldberg machine in your head, all the
Yep.
moving pieces that need to be in place. How do you not just get crushed at that step and go, I don't know if I can do this? Even with the co-founder, like, this is just way too much. And there are people who've tried this before, and I have to involve myself not just at an operational level, but you had a lot of learning to do on the clinical side too. You have to be very
Mhm.
familiar with the clinical facts around mental health and mental disease. How did you
Yeah.
even tackle that problem?
Well, another spot that I got lucky, two like incredibly fortunate things. One was, I ended up discovering this problem because of this program called X Genesis. I met this amazing guy, Tom Higley, who's building a program, and it basically is an idea that all the accelerators out there are kind of geared towards first-time founders that already have ideas. And his idea was, what if we create a program for multiple time founders that explicitly don't have the idea? His thesis, which I think was a neat one, is that serial entrepreneurs get mediocre ideas too far because they have too much credibility and they know how to do it. So they can raise capital, they can assemble teams. And then like 3 years later, it's like, oh, this idea wasn't good enough. So he's like, we need more idea on what's the problem, right? And so what he created in Denver, and this is where I met the idea, was come to Denver. At that point, it was 10 days. I think now it's a month. And I'm going to introduce you to 10 wicked problems in healthcare. You spend 10 days, all we'll do is give you egregious access to national experts about these 10 problems. And hopefully, if nothing speaks to you, just like go on and you wasted 10 days of your life. If something speaks to you, found a company. And if you found a company with it kind of there on the cap table in a small way to sort of say, hey, we helped you get there and we brought a network and the idea. So that helped me do diligence way faster than I could have
Okay.
ever, to like really get conviction that this would be neat. Then when I found out Medicare is going to, but that was like collaborative care made sense. I was kind of doing all the normal things that healthcare entrepreneurs do. It's like, well, maybe I'll sell this to self-insured employers. Maybe, maybe there's a capitated system like Kaiser. It was like, but it was like the value was there. But so often in healthcare, it's like you kind of have a sense of like, where you could make the world better, but then to build a company or to make sure a company is the right vehicle to do better, it has to also be like, well, how would I have revenue? Who would I make happy? Who would I make bad? How do you put it together? And that was where I was spinning a little bit. Once Medicare was moving, that was like it started to click. But then I just asked everybody I met in that program, like, who's the clinical expert, and not just like the researcher, like he or she could do um, um, RCTs and like publish stuff. But like, who's the builder, the doer, the administrator? And like, I asked like 5 people this, and like 3 of them gave me the same name, Verna Little, right? And one of them was silly enough to give me her cell phone. So I just called her out of the blue and like named just enough to have credibility. It turned out she was gardening at the time. And I was like, hey, this thing's coming. And she knew it was coming because she was on the advisory panel. She had been implementing collaborative care in her clinic as a senior vice president of behavioral health for 15 years at one of the biggest Medicaid federally qualified health clinics in New York State, had been a national advisor. So she knew it was coming, the reimbursement. She knew more about the model then than I've forgotten now. I mean, it's like, she still knows 1,000 times what I can do. But it was, I sort of said, like, someone needs to build an organization that can partner with primary care groups to do this, or they're never going to do it. And that was like, she was like, of course, but I don't know what that means. Like, I have a kid in college. I've had the same job for 15 years. So I was like, oh, I know a little bit about starting things. And so, then it was, first zero, it was really 0 to 1 was getting her bought in. I flew to New York like that same week, and we ended up meeting in a conference room of an old friend of mine's and spent a whole afternoon sketching out like what the business could be. I think the name, she actually just told me this recently. I'd already come up with the name Concert apparently by that. because I knew we needed to work in concert with primary care, but I didn't know much else. And we sketched it, and I knew I wanted to bootstrap the business. I could put some of my own money in, but certainly couldn't hire her.
Yeah.
And she had a kid in college, like she couldn't take career risks. So she started as a founding advisor essentially and worked for nights and weekends. And it took us probably a year. We needed to wait 6 months for the Medicare guidance to come out and find out like what the details would be, think about how we could price it. I was fortunate to have started a company before. So a law firm would let me like incorporate and not let me pay my legal bills as we figured out how could you contract for it, what would those vehicles look like, but really what that was at the time was like a contract, a PowerPoint deck, me and Verna, and then what I just started to do was kind of cold call. It was only Medicare then, so we picked Arizona, Colorado, and California. I just started like calling medical groups, and sort of saying like, hey, do you have problems treating behavioral health? Like, would you like help? And a lot of people said, who are you? And they ignored us and stuff. But eventually, we probably started pitching that. And 5-6 months later, we had a couple of small practices in Arizona in particular that said, yeah, it's a real problem. And I'll try you out. And then Verna still wasn't full time, but we started hiring part-time social workers and part-time psychiatrists in Arizona to do this work. And Verna was managing them clinically while having a 70-hour-a-week job, and I was trying to keep the lights on and do our early technology prototyping on our patient registry.
And so it's just, I can't help but notice, you talk about cold calling and everything you talked about at the beginning of this interview about learning how to campaign, cold call, make all these connections.
I'm still bad at it though. I still, like when someone's mean to me, I still go walk around the block. I would get so fired so quickly if I was a sales development rep at a stage startup, right? Because there it's like pound the phones, it's a numbers game. You make 120 calls. If 5 of them are good conversations, that's 5 good conversations every day. You can feed that in. And I'd like, someone's mean to me and I like hang up. I walk around the block. I go to the ocean. I wonder what I'm doing with my life. I think about it. It's like, you got to hang up, make the next call,
Well, how do you, I was going to ask about that, how you deal with the rejection of this, because I think a lot of it's, everyone is seeing the balls that go through the hoop, but they don't see the ones that you miss.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about some of those
one thing
misses?
is, we were lucky we had always been pretty well resourced. So we kind of had money at the beginning to hire a team immediately. There's good and bad from that, I didn't do that at Concert, so there was no team, it was just me doing it. And that creates some necessity. The other thing I remember going, if you could rewind it, I could have done that for so many millions of dollars less, now, and I was like, a Concert, I'll do it perfectly. And now looking back 4 years earlier, you're like, oh my God, I could have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars early, if I just not been dumb. I think one lesson is like, don't think about trying to scale too quickly. Like you first just got to figure out, like, can you create value in the world? And you do that as an unscalable way as possible. I wasted a lot of time, sometime thinking about what our market, it's like my old MBA coming back. Okay, this is what will be, this is how big the business will be. This is how we're going to do a financial model in 3 years. And some of that work's useful, but really all we needed to prove was we knew Verna could do this model. She'd done it at scale. She's a social worker and psychologist. She could take great care of patients. What we needed to know is would a primary care office say, yeah, I'll do this with us, right? Because what we do is contract with them, deliver care together, and get paid together from health plans. So it's really can I get a doctor or a medical group to say yes, that we want a partner? Can we then deliver good care, with this joint team? And will health plans really pay us for it? Will patients be happy? Will the health plans pay us enough money that we can pay our team, that we can have margin, that we can grow? And, we did a bunch of stuff early on, but that was all we needed to do, right? So,
yeah,
now it's simple, but you look back, but part of that is it is interesting. One thing I learned is we realized quickly that we'd start with small medical groups, because big health systems, they're not they're not going to want to do this when no one's done it before, right? They're risk averse, and they'll also answer the question, hey, could you support, here in town, sharp scripts? Could you support the volume I would give you with 600 physicians? No, I can't support that. It's like me and Verna, right? Of course not. That's like, you're taking care of hundreds of thousands of people that need help,
Yeah.
And I don't know, we always like to give health systems like, crap for being too risk averse, but it would be stupid for them to be the first person in some ways, so we realized, let's go find 3 physician practices, 5 physician practices, someone that really feels this acutely, and they could take a little more risk on, sure, I'll sign this contract, sure, we'll see if it works together, let's do it. And one thing I realized, which I would not have expected, was like, I knew all these doctors and I knew all these, I've been in healthcare for 10 years, but the world of big health systems, academic medicine, it's a different universe than private practice. It's like, they don't know each other, right? Private practices are not on LinkedIn, it's like all this stuff. And so it took me a while to how do you get in front of these people? How do you do it?
That.
I wasted a bunch of time trying to buy Google AdWords and do all these things that would be cool, right? And like social and marketing funnels. And it's like, and the only thing that worked was like cold call the front desk, say, I'm a new behavioral health medical group in town, with a little bit different model, in which instead of referring out to us, we work together, we care for patients together, and we build this new code. And, do you want to learn more about that? And do you see a lot of patients with depression, anxiety? Do you have trouble getting them to specialists? And even if they get to specialists, are you frustrated that you don't find out what's happening with them? And you can't really coordinate it. And they all say yes to that. And enough of them said, yeah, let's take a meeting. And, and we're convinced enough that we could do it, that they let us get going. So it was right at the end of 2017, really a year and a half, 2 years after we left Reflection, a year and a half after I came up with the idea, was when we started caring for patients in a systematic way.
When you walked into those meetings initially, right, when they said, okay, we'll give you a chance, we'll hear you out, seems interesting, what did you walk into that meeting with?
Like a 5-page keynote presentation that I would go to Kinko's with and get at the nice spiral bound book, and a black back, so it looked official, and a 10-page legal agreement that DLA Piper had drafted for us, kind of without me paying them for it yet. And then either Verna or one of our early part-time social workers, they would say, this is the model, this is how it's going to get paid, this is the contract you need to sign for us to do it, and here's the person that'll take care of your patients.
How do you feel about people who say, because there's the short squeeze area of time, right? I feel like there's this adolescence that you went through where you're just squeezed on both ends. You don't have the money to go to hire the help you need. So you have to do 10 jobs, each one of you.
Yep.
But you're also taking a lot of risk and really putting yourselves out there. You're very liable for a lot of promises that you're going to have to make, that you have to come good on. Did that ever feel uncomfortable? Yep. Did it ever feel like you were faking it before you were making it,
Yeah, there's always that aspect, right? You got to sell the vision, fudge as if you're a real organization when you barely exist yet, But our view was always to be, so there's a bit of salesmanship there, but I think it's always to be pretty level. And in fact, actually, one of the things we've learned over the years, I wasn't nearly as good at this when we started, is to not overpromise doctors and make it really clear you know what you're talking about, right? So not just, this is the rate that you think you're going to get insurance, but this is what we actually get paid and what your denial rate is, or how much your copays you'll collect, and starting to almost give them more bad news up front. It's like, my world, you live this, that there's a lot more than just, it's theoretically a code, or this there's a research paper about this. It's how this works in practice. And the more you're almost pessimistic and not overselling it early, the way it works. The nice thing about us, and I think it's true with a lot of clinical services companies, is we know there's a lot of technology enablement that we're going to do, but we were really lucky. I was sitting there with a licensed psychologist and social worker, still licensed. She has 20 years of experience doing this. She's cared for thousands and thousands of people herself in a primary care setting, and currently had a day job in which she was managing 300 behavioral health providers. So it's like the idea that we couldn't take care of our first 20 people, Vera couldn't figure out, by hook or by crook, she'll just call them and do great care. But if it's not her, we're going to find a great social worker or nurse that's going to do it, and under her guidance. It's like, so that really, really helped. It's not all, but having that, because at low scale, we know how to do that. I mean, so you have to have this vision of why you think it could be big, why I wouldn't be the right person to found a business or interested in it if we thought we'd be a small private practice therapy business in suburban Phoenix, but we could operate as if we were one at the beginning, because it's like all we're proving is we can get doctors to sign the contract, we can deliver great care together, and the plans will pay for it the way we expected, and then the rest is after that.
Did anyone ever try to talk you out of it, out of starting Concert?
Yeah, I mean, there were times that I thought about talking myself out. This is, again, I'm incredibly fortunate. This was 2 years before we really operated in business. I didn't make a dollar that could float the family, right? And frankly, float the family in a way that we could live as if we were a busy two-income family, like have a nanny for the kids and have them in preschool and all these things that most people have no hope of doing, right? Like, so I was incredibly lucky, and putting a huge amount of financial and psychological stress on Lori to float the family, working her butt off, make a ton of money, and have it all go to covering our expenses and to pay Concert, because we were the first investors in Concert, and every 4 or 5 weeks asking her to, hey, is it all right if I write another $10,000 check from our HELOC into the company account? It's interesting. I remember I talked to another entrepreneur that had bootstrapped, and because that was new to me, and I told him that I would do 6 months and $50,000, and he was like, "You're going to do at least double that, money wise, and couple of years." And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And he was like, he was exactly right, and I was totally wrong, right? But it's a fascinating thing when you start businesses. When you decide to, we glorify it, but you're on a path, and you're like, if I stop now, that's going to be really embarrassing, because I got to go pay this HELOC back. Like, we didn't really, it's like we were, our house was paid for. We didn't have the cash at that point, and it was like, that's like egg on your face, and it's like, man, I'm getting a lot of this traction, we're seeing progress, we're learning. I've almost got this deal closed, or I've almost got the second deal closed. I think we can make it work. But it's, it's important to put parameters around there. And if I had been in a different situation where I didn't have the spouse that was able to do it, we would have failed, right? At some point, I wouldn't have been able to pay my mortgage, right? I would have needed to go get a job. So there was that of my own self and my own just sort of good fortune that I had enough success already, that we had some background, and had an amazing wife who has a great career, and she was the biggest investor because it was her income that was going into this in many ways. The other thing, I'd say the most thing we got was, at that point, you still had a lot of the venture ecosystem saying, like, this seems like a services business, not a tech business. And like, we like to invest in tech companies, and they were certainly big, and our friend Mo had done it. One Medical was already scaling. Oak Street Health was already doing great. And so it wasn't as though this was like the idea that you had found a provider organization or a health plan as opposed to a tech company wasn't new, but it was earlier. So there's certainly more people that said, like, this can't get big. This doesn't seem venture backable. This isn't worth your time. I got some of that.
So did you, I was going to say, did you put the feelers out to like seed funds to say, look, I just need like $1 million or 1.5 would help us go to a 12-month build cycle, give us 18 months to really prove this out, and I'll show you the numbers and we can decide then? Did that ever cross your mind seriously to go down that route?
I did a little bit of talking and stuff, but I was pretty committed to, like, I really wanted to first sale real patient data, real validation of the model before we raised capital. And so, we ended up taking a couple of steps, right? It was all me. Then we did what we ended up calling a pre-seed round, which was some people that I knew some of them were friends, most of them were more professional people, but it was like angel investors, some folks that, and that was maybe $500,000 new capital that came in addition to what we'd invested. And that was really the point of, we had some traction, we had some customers, we had some revenue, I don't remember what it was, $10,000 a month or something. And we had some employees, and then it was frankly like, we're going to start losing, our payroll is going to be, we were hiring more and more people. And it was like, I can't float this anymore. Like, we could be in a situation in which we started losing $20,000 or $30,000 a month. And I wasn't in the part. We like literally did not have it, or even if we literally had it, it was that's a dumb decision for my family, or maybe we was already. So it's like, we need some help. We had enough traction and went and got $500,000 to do that, and then ran with it and got ourselves kind of up to maybe $40,000 a month in revenue and some repeatable sales process and stuff. And that's when we did the first kind of institutional round, and we did that $2 million seed round.
You don't remember this. I tried to talk you out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't remember that, do you? Yeah, before you met Verna, I tried to talk you out of it because I was like, I just don't see how it didn't seem like the future. It does now. You've convinced me it is, and not because of the success, but shortly after that, I was like, okay, I get it now, right? And so it's interesting because I think we're living in this Southern California, or let's just say
I'm a selective
California.
Non-listener, right?
Yeah,
selective non-listener. When people are being negative.
Yeah, selective non-listener, or also, it's very easy when you're in the digital health space to surround yourself by people like us who are talking about, how you can use machine learning to do this and that. My background was that. Reflexion Health used a very, very high level technology stack to do what it was delivering. And I was like, wait, well, I'm coming from the clinical. I know how people work in this space. It's like, yeah, I know how doctors talk to psychologists, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't, right? I don't know to the level of how to extend our reach using all these other resources that are there, like social workers and psychologists that exist that just aren't integrated into the system well. And so I think you've woven those pieces together really tightly now. In that first 3 months, what was like your favorite memory? Like, what's the first three months of when you would consider Concert to really have started to like its first patient? Like, what's your favorite memory?
I'd say it was probably the first time we started getting testimonials from the doctor or the patients about how much they loved Angela, who was our first care manager. And that was one, satisfying because you could see misery disappearing, and they described it in a way that was really impactful. And then it was also that, it's interesting. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but the one thing about startups is you really, at the very early stage, you're actually making much less of a difference than you would if you just took a normal job, right? Like if you just ran for me on the administrative side, right? If I was just a deputy administrator of a service line at a big health system, every day you're seeing thousands of people. They're walking through that door. You're saving their lives. You're giving them medicine, and you make these little changes. You go to startups and we glorify it, but you're like, no, I'm making PowerPoints. Like I'm on the phone. We're not doing anything, And so that was fun when it made that transition. And the patients have always been most important, and seeing those outcomes were great. And then also seeing the physicians, some of our early physicians, say, this is really working. Like, this is helping me. It saved me some time. I love working with Angela. I think this, the code really got paid, that boring stuff. But like, that was like, yeah, this could work. That was really gratifying. One, because it was like, there's someone's life is better. And two, it was like, oh man, this thesis might be right. Like, we might be onto something here.
And how has your view of mental health changed during the process of starting Concert, thinking about the idea back in 2016 to now? I think it'd be very safe to say everybody understands that is much more conscious of the landscape and the problems of mental health, especially since everyone's isolated now under the auspice of COVID. Mm-hmm. And if you're in the digital health space, it's like, there are infographics coming up on LinkedIn every day on here's 1,000 mental health startups, right? So what's your view on where you guys fit into that landscape, where you want to be eventually, but also just in the entire stigma of mental health as a disease, a set of disease processes that affect all of us.
I'm still a novice in many ways. I mean, I'm super fortunate to have Verna and other people on our team that are the real clinical experts. I learn every month. We do an all hands meeting, and almost always there's a clinical component to that, teaching a new skill. And I'm just, I'm in awe, like this year rather, what the tools that our clinicians were teaching each other on how to handle social isolation yourself while handling that with your patients, right, that are experiencing incredible stresses from that isolation, right? How they're going to handle, I remember when George Floyd got killed, and that erupted into our consciousness. And we were at that point working with practices all across the country, some where you would have patients who are African American that were much more sensitive to whether or not their care manager was. And how do you do this when you're trying to do the right thing, but you're not African American, and you can't empathize the same way they can of what they're going through and those stresses. Vice versa, you might have someone that's starting to say some pretty racist things on the phone because that's or on the video visit because that's on top of everyone's mind, and we're going through that. And how do you support someone who has a real clinical condition, but is also expressing views that you find abhorrent or inconsistent with the values of the company? And I'm like a deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, this is like, I'm overwhelmed. And it's just watching these amazing social workers, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners say, like, this is what we do, right? Like, let's go find the person that really knows this. Let's get a presentation together. Let's train everybody up. Let's understand it. Let's recognize that I took a class on this already in my master's in social work. I was like, that was not in my MBA. I'm really glad someone else knows about this stuff. It's like, I'm thinking about some of this stuff for the first time.
Yeah.
Really great that other people aren't. And then watching that, I think when we did it right, it's a way to both support our team because we're going through the same stresses that everyone is, but then watch them translate that and hopefully, reflect that into the thousands of people we're caring for any given day. That's what I've really appreciated. And how early it is. I mean, people say, well, are you working on digital therapeutics yet, right? And all these people that are building software products that'll be interventions for behavioral health. It's like, not yet, but I love it. I mean, we will be the biggest customer user of these things. Maybe we'll end up being a developer too. But I mean, I think it's like where we want to do is our job is to get everyone the care they need and to give it the best evidence-based care. And right now that's mostly psychotherapy and medication. We'll set in things like that, but in a few years it's going to be a lot more things that are pure digital or hybrid movements. And that's super exciting. That's the world that I kind of know a little bit about. I came from, I can pretend as though I know what software is, even though you and I both know that's mostly a lie. I'm just the business stooge. But then there's also so much advance on the biochemistry, the genomic sequencing, right? This, how do you understand, where we can do more to understand a new class of medications coming, or we can predict prospectively whether or not certain SSRIs are going to work for people. And there's hopefully Concert can be a mechanism to learn that stuff really quickly and propagate it out a lot faster than it would if we were not a digitally native new learning organization.
Has that been a challenge for the practitioners at Concert, which is dealing with a more medication-centric health system that we traditionally have had in the area of psychiatry, mostly because although the physicians and social workers
certainly an aspect of that's certainly an aspect of collaborative care, is that even in behavioral health, you have a stigma in which people, or not a stigma, separation, on certain people that learn, even all the way down to, counselors don't call their patients, they call them clients, right? It's the same person, but if you're just getting therapy, it's your client, and if you're a doctor, you call them patients, right? And there's kind of reasons for that. And it's deep seated in the way they're trained and taught. And it's, are you the medical model or not, and those things. And part of collaborative care is to kind of, I think when done well, I think the approach that under Verna's leadership we've taken is like, our only ideology is we want to get people better. and like what works, right? We're going to be, one of our core values of the company is rigor, right?
Yeah.
What works, use evidence-based techniques, stand on the shoulders of giants that have built evidence before in both psychotherapy and both medication. Second is be patient-centric. Like some patients are going to say, I don't want drugs. It's okay. We'll just do therapy. But we're just going to do therapy. We're still going to track if you're getting better. And if we can't get you better yet, without any using medications, we're never going to, it's always your decision, but we're going to bring it up. Hey, I know you didn't want to take meds, but psychotherapy has gotten you this far. Should we, do we think about it, right? And vice versa. You have some people that say, I think I don't have time for therapy, or I think it's for wimps, but I'm happy to take a drug. It's like, okay, that's great. Fine. There's medication that might be able to work, but the success is not, did you get prescribed the drug? It's not, did you take the drug, right? It's, did you get better, right? Are you in remission? Are you sleeping better? Do you have energy? Do you have that? Or are we managing that? Some people will. And so I think that framework, that chassis of, I am committed to you as a person to get you better. I will not, I do not want to abandon you until you're better. And I want to bring every tool I can to you. And you're still in the driver's seat about which ones you want to use, right? And it's complicated. There's doctors, some of our primary care physicians will say, I want to use medicine as the last resort, and I always want to be using psychotherapy as the initial intervention. Others are, just if you say the word sad, they take out their pen and boom, they've got their first SSRI and they just go, and they're very comfortable. And both those could be the right entry point, and we work for them, and we work to help center it on what the patient wants and needs, and then do that. I think hopefully that mindset, if we can build that into the ethos of the organization, that will, as new innovations come, we can learn about them. We're not going to ever use them with patients until we're sure they work. And then once we're sure they work, we'll use them with patients, and then we'll track which patients do they work for. And I mean, hopefully wouldn't it be amazing if there turned out there was a single intervention that worked for everybody that has depression and they got better? I don't think it will, that'll never get there, because depression isn't a thing. It's a confluence of things that we call one. We have one word for.
That's right.
And we're still so early in understanding it and teasing it out.
I know you just recently closed a funding round. What is that going to allow you guys, the team, to do?
Yeah, we're really excited about it. I think, we've tried all the way back from those bootstrapping days to be, made a decision that we thought we could take capital in, deploy it effectively to hire great clinicians, build some technology, build our business systems ahead, because we really did think we could build an industry-leading entity, but to always be focused on, it's a business. It's like this fundraising stuff. It's exciting. Like, in the end, you make the business will operate when you can get paid for a service that you're providing. You create value in the world. How someone will pay you, and they can pay you more for you create more value than it costs you to create, and you can get paid for it, and you can pay everybody. And so really, really excited about our new financial partners, our investors, but, most excited about the fact that we're mostly funded by revenue, and we're mostly paying for ourselves with that growth. That said, the capital we were able to raise this year from Vertical Venture Partners, the new funder, Town Hall Ventures, Healthy Ventures, Clear Vision Equity, who were also participating in our seed, but re-upped in some really big ways. And then Silicon Valley Bank doing kind of a credit line for us at a facility, gives us resources. We're moving from 4 states to 8 states this year. We're moving from not just serving independent primary care practices, but some really, really big health systems, which we're stoked about, and have an enormous amount of work, and can start to build the technology, the revenue cycle teams and things like that to support our clinicians. But the majority of the money is now, and I think will always hopefully be going to our clinical operations, going to recruit, onboard, train, supervision, right, for amazing clinicians. And our view is, I think now it's kind of cool to people to be, the venture jargon is full stack or tech-enabled service. But I think a lot of people really want to envision themselves as a technology company that happens to employ, clinicians because they have to do it, or maybe they 1099 clinicians, they're part of but they conceptualize the clinician as the product. I think what we wanted to do from the beginning is conceptualize our clinical team or clinical operations as the core of the business, right? One of our other core values of the company is service. Most importantly, that's service to our patients. But I think the rest of us have to think about we're in service to those clinicians. We have to sell the right deals where they can do great medicine. We have to sell them in the right way that sets us up for success. Our technology team is doing nothing but helping those clinicians be more effective, right? Be more efficient, right? And helping those patients get better faster. And it's not, I don't think this vision is like, well, we need to have some social workers around while we're training our AI bots and then we're going to go all virtual. It's like, no, but those AI bots are going to help patients self-service in a way that is more effective in the long run, than a clinician could ever be. But it's going to be about enabling the best clinicians to treat more people, to be more patient-centric, and to be more effective, not as a way to get rid of them.
That makes sense. I'm really, really cognizant of caregiver fatigue, and I can't help but ask you about that just because I know that, your team is doing such a great job helping patients with their mental health. How are you handling this problem of just making sure the team's okay? Because right now, I'm sure you're also seeing, correct me if I'm wrong, an influx of possible patients that are caregivers, right? That are physicians, respiratory therapists, nurses. I mean, they're going through a really tough time right now. Not just them, but other essential workers. The people at the grocery stores. Yeah. People are being forced to endure COVID in a very different way than most of us.
We're seeing that a lot just in our existing practices. You're seeing an increase in nurses and techs and doctors just showing up, as patients. It's different, right? They're tough patients, right? They think they know some of these answers. They do know some of these answers. So there's some unique elements. And it's funny, as we've built our team and, I think we have a growing number of clinicians that are good at and like that, and sort of like, oh, as a nurse, so like, let me have, this person take care of them because he's really good with nursing. She's really good at that. We also got asked by one of our partners, I think we're going to start talking about it publicly, but I don't want to do it on this because I don't think I have permission yet. But with one of our, and they asked us to say, hey, we want you to take care of our employees in addition to our patients. They have what's called an EAP program, which is like a thing a lot of big employers have, which is like a hotline you can call for all sorts of things. One of them could be if you're stressed or fatigued, but they're kind of limited normally. You normally have a non-licensed clinician. You're maybe doing a little bit of coaching, trying to connect them. But it's like, doctors aren't going to do that. Nurses aren't going to do that. And so it was the week of Christmas. I had to find some lawyers and get really busy to figure out how we could contract with an employer, not a medical group, and we just launched that, which has been exciting. It's exciting because we're helping a small number of people that have come through that. But what's more exciting is in some ways that the team that we were caring for said, this is good. This care is not just good enough for our patients, but it's good enough for our team, and they really need it. And I mean, the work that people in EDs and ICUs and hospital floors right now, it's been crazy. I mean, thank God, so many of them are getting their vaccine, and the hopefully personal risk profile is beginning to finally go down, because what they've done just working 24/7 and under that real risk to care for people that are really sick is amazing. Us being able to play a role for that has been great, and us recognizing our clinicians, some of whom got COVID, either some early when they were co-located in their primary care offices, or just got it in the way they're living, life like so many people are, but recognizing that that's a real stress, for ourselves. I know it was funny. We had a big rule early too on our own team, on our team side. We used to say, one of them, we were already distributed. We were already a remote workforce. And we used to have these really strong kind of rules like, hey, it's not okay if your kid's crying during a session with a patient. Just because you work from home doesn't mean, you're still a professional context. You have to say, you have to give their, but then all the schools got canceled. And it's like, listen, that can't be the advice anymore. Right. It's going to happen. Like, we all have them, you got kids running around. So now it's like, okay, one is don't feel bad about it.
Hell no, I don't have them.
Happens to me,
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. And then also like, but hey, let's figure this out on the fly. Like, talk to your patient at the beginning about how the fact that your kid's at home on Zoom school and is 6, and so gets up from Zoom school all the time, and make sure they understand it. A small percentage of patients maybe find that unacceptable and get them to someone that doesn't have kids at home.
Yeah.
But the majority of patients, if you explain it, will understand it. It could be a point, things like that. But it's been a lot from the biggest picture stuff to the littlest details that you've had to move, both with our patients and our team.
Well, Spence, this has been interesting, man. I like I said, I tried to talk you out of this in the beginning, and what's amazing, and I was trying to push you into a technology-enabled, a much more technology-enabled realm. Not that you don't have a very, very astute eye for how to use technology in concert. I'm just saying I was trying to steer you in other directions. You were very steadfast in knowing that this is the problem you're trying to solve, and I highly respect that. And I think it's so amazing what you've done over just the course of a short few years. Just for everyone at home, you obviously are very busy, very focused. What's a typical day like for you? How do you organize your week, your day, so that you are as productive as possible, but that you're still balancing, being a great dad, being a great husband, and being present for those things in your life?
I don't know that I do all those things all that well a lot of times. Lori's the tentpole there. I think she's great about reminding me that it's not all about the company and the job, and you have to turn off. Harder to create boundaries now that we're all working from home. You can work all the time. It's like, why not answer emails at 10 o'clock because you're in the same place you are when you're answering emails at 2 in the afternoon. So I don't know that I'm a role model there, other than you have to be intentional about it and focus. We moved during COVID to a new place this fall. I took that moment to not bring the phone into the bedroom anymore, and I've actually held that for about 3 months. That's been my own personal. I really had gotten into some unhealthy habits there. Email and Twitter were the last things that I saw as I fell asleep. They were the first things I looked at in the morning. And even sometimes you wake up at 3, especially with an East Coast team, you wake up at 4 in the morning and you start to already see emails, and then you get it. And so it's just like, I can't do that when I'm in bed, I'm sleeping, or I'm talking with Lori, or, I'm with my wife. And if I really think I need to get out, do work, like get up, stand up, go into the bathroom where the charger is, get your phone, and you can do it. And that happens to me every once in a while. I can't sleep. I get up at 4 in the morning and I go do it, and I click in, but it's like, listen, I'm going to work. I'm not going to be there with my face on my pillow, scrolling or maybe responding to 2 emails. And so that's been the one tip that's been helpful, and it's made a pretty big impact. That, I think the other is just remembering to go outside, remember to exercise. I had kind of hacked my life before. I used to commute on my bike, and so my commute was my exercise. Now that I work from home, I don't get that, and I've had to be intentional to try to get that back, because I think it's an important part of not gaining weight, but also just kind of feeling better.
How do you prioritize your day at work? How do you know any one day what does how do all the different tasks the concert needs your attention?
We're trying to get better about that. I do a couple of things, which is I've now started to do what are my big picture things that I want to get done this quarter. I promise it to my board. So I embarrass myself if I don't get it done. And then I try to keep that on top of my Evernote to-do list. Cal Newport wrote this book, Deep Work, that I liked a lot. I read a few years ago. I ignore most of his advice, which includes like not checking social media, and batching emails. I'm terrible at that. One thing I try to be good at, though, is writing a to-do list at the beginning of the day, and then rewriting it as the last thing I try to do, right? Which is sort of like, what didn't I get done yet? What are my priorities for tomorrow based on what my schedule is? What are the tasks that I need to get done? And that can be good on not just moving into responsive mode. What's the email I just got? What's the text message I just got? And a little bit more proactive on what are the biggest things I need to get done, and how do I do that? That's been, along with leaving my phone out of my bedroom, that act of writing the to-do list at the end of the night can be a nice thing to say, that's some really important stuff. I'm going to work on it tomorrow. but it's 6 o'clock and I'm going to go play with my kids now. So, and every once in a while you say, no, that really has to get done before midnight. Like it really does. So I'm going to play with my kids, and I'm then going to do that. Or I'm not going to play with my kids like I should, or I'm going to be distracted. But more than 9 times out of 10, these things that feel urgent, you're like, I can do that tomorrow. And if I wake up and I'm rested and I can crank that out, I'll do it. So
How have you been with your Robinhood account?
yeah, I've been, it's funny. I mean, I've got
What do you think about all that?
I don't know. It's wild. The only thing I learned in business school is that trying to day trade or trying to beat the market is silly, right? And I the only thing I learned was try to save as much money as you can, and invest it broadly in accounts and ignore them, kind of thing. And one of the things that's funny, I think a nice mechanism that I have is I've never bought an individual security. Like I've never owned. And, sometimes, and people say, oh, I bought Tesla early. I mined Bitcoin early. I did Amazon early. It's like, that's great. But, over time, you normally have as many of those. You have more losses than you do wins there. Sometimes it's nice, I think, for my own commitment mechanism that I don't want to break that streak that says I've never bought an individual security. All I've ever done is buy broadly indexed funds and stuff like that. So I think that helps me not download Robinhood and day trade as my replacement for the the poker game with buddies that I used to have back when we could be in the same room with people. Yeah.
Right. So looking back, I mean, at all these things you've done, all the moves you've made, like you said, some were luck, some were calculated. Is this the place that you feel comfortable with now? Like you're like, this is it. I finally found it. This is it. You're in your stride.
Yeah, I think so. I'm loving it. I'm super fortunate. It really feels like Concert Health is going to be the most important thing I do in my professional career. I think we have an opportunity to build a really big organization that helps a lot of people, creates really great career paths for amazingly talented clinicians. And that's a blast. One thing I'm learning, I think stage wise, I think I'm a little better at this stage than I am at the true startup stage. I'm bad at the cold calling piece or whatever. It's really fun to have a team and have that motivation and all those sorts of things. So we'll do that. We'll find out. I think it's some people find out at some point they get bored or they're not good at it. You're great to get in the first 10 million in revenue, the first proof point, and then you gotta, hire the adults. We're old enough to be adults now. I got my hair's all gray, but maybe that'll turn out. But right now, it's more and more fun as we grow. So we'll see where that happens.
Well, how do people get a hold of you? How do they get a hold of you and also find out and keep track of what you're up to? Yeah,
so Twitter's great. SC Hutchins on there, check it. You can still ping. I'm still the person that gets the email alerts at the back of the concert web form. So just go to concerthealth.com or concerthealth.io, and you can find there and get the web form on the company. We're starting to have a bunch of team that's a lot better and smarter than me. So we're getting good about press releases. There's a blog going live on our website soon. The social stuff on LinkedIn and Twitter, and a little bit Facebook, is getting more regular. So in all those places are great spots to sort of keep dibs on us as we grow. And we need a lot of awesome people to join the team. We're hiring a ton for clinicians and hiring a lot of non-clinical roles too. And so if people think what we're doing is interesting, and you're smarter than me, look at our career page, and we love those. Love to have people join the team.
Okay. Hey man, thank you so much for spending 2 hours out of your very busy day to tell us about this and just tell your story. I think this is the kind of thing where there's a bunch of people out there who are in a line of work, and it doesn't exactly align with what they want to do. They're not really sure what they want to do yet, but they're very, very fearful and anxious about taking some time off, or even setting up the structure of their lives where they can take the time off to find out. And you've been through those very scary steps. Not only have you done it with concert, but you did it a couple times, right? And it seems like you're getting better and better at it each time, or at least getting just more comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is what I think a lot of startups is, right? Like work at startups is just the risk of not knowing where things are going to go. It can be something that everyone has to deal with differently, but you figured it out. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. It was great to catch up. Thank you for having me and to tell some of these old stories.